So let's begin our study. We can start with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now that's how we translate it in English. Now Genesis 1:1 speaks of the creation of all the prime materials of the universe when God set everything into motion. We're going to take a look at the scripture in Hebrew. And so we can see that Hebrew is read from right to left. And it says,
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
And the critical word here is the very first word that I pronounce, Bereshim, or Bereshit. Bereshit. Bereshit is also the name of the book. It's the first word that appears in the Bible, and it is the name that we translate Genesis, or that is the beginning, or how it began. And so we have several Bereshits throughout the book of Genesis. And you find, every time you find a Bereshit, you don't find the finished work. You find where it began and it developed from there. So you have to think about that as far as the creation story is concerned. The word is more about beginning something or putting something in motion or the development of something than it is about a finished work. It is not a one and done event. We will return to this in lesson 2. So I just want to present that idea. So when he says in the beginning, he did that. He put everything in motion that, as far as the cosmos is concerned, that we see today. And it's still developing to this day. It's still expanding. Okay, so you must keep this in mind as we see this Bereshit played out throughout the first 12 chapters, especially in the book of Genesis. You're going to find it in other areas of the entire Old Testament. You know, we're going to see a lot of that, but especially in the book of Genesis and with added attention to the first 12 chapters. Just as a footnote, I want to clarify that the Bible speaks of 3 different beginnings. We have Genesis 1:1, which is the beginning of creation, how everything began, how it started and in development. Then we have John 1:1. Now, 1 John 1:1 goes even beyond, goes back in time beyond the beginning of creation. It's the beginning of time or the beginning of everything. It goes so far back, and it probably really has no beginning as we know it or understand beginning. But we're talking about the beginning of time as we know it, long before the beginning of creation. We have John 1:1, which is the beginning of time as we know it, long before the beginning of creation. Then we have 1 John 1, which is the beginning of the gospel. So if you read those 3 beginnings, you're talking about 3 different beginnings, not or 3 different subjects. That's what we're talking about. Okay, now let's consider cosmology and biblical creation. We're going to take a look at some interesting things and schools of thought in cosmology. And even though this is irrelevant to the purpose of the Bible, we might ask, how did God do this? How did God create the universe? And that's interesting. Now, theories abound, and some are worthy of contemplation, and others are entirely disposable. After all, a theory is merely just that. It's a theory. But let's contemplate some of them. Now, I reiterate my statement of the irrelevance of God's methodology. Nevertheless, let's consider, let's take into account the Big Bang, for example. Now, I want to really respectfully present the Big Bang. Now, most Christians don't understand the Big Bang, and I'm not talking about the mathematics or the astrophysical aspect. No, I'm talking about understand the history of the Big Bang. Now, I understand that the Big Bang is being hotly challenged in the scientific circles today, just as Darwinian evolution is. Of course, that's been completely excluded. So there are some schools of thought that are coming up by some brilliant astrophysicists. One I highly respect, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He has, and Donald Goldsmith, 2 brilliant astrophysicists or cosmologists, present a new theory in their book, The Origins, 14 Billion Years of Cosmic Evolution. And in their book, they present a challenge to the Big Bang, but what they have It's almost an atheistic version to where there have been billions of universes. In other words, it expands and it contracts and it expands and it contracts and it does this over and over again over periods of billions of years. And so and this has been happening forever. There is no beginning as we understand that. And I find that more difficult than asking a child what came first, the chicken or the egg. The Bible does answer that question. Of course, the chicken came first, but you have to have a beginning. And they give no beginning to that. And they present their argument. Nevertheless, I want to discuss, albeit briefly, these 14 billion years and just about all origin theories espouse. Okay, what if it was the Big Bang? Let's take into consideration the Big Bang. How would that affect the biblical account? Let's say God did create the universe beginning with a Big Bang. Now, do you know where the Big Bang, what the origin of the Big Bang, who brought about the Big Bang, and why this concept came about? Would the universe's age, let's say the universe is 14 billion years, would that have any bearing on the validity of the biblical account of creation? Would that change the validity of the biblical account of creation? We'd have to think about that. I'm not threatened by time. We have to think about it. Why would 14 billion years be a threat to God or the biblical truth or the biblical account? Peter informed us that to God, time is irrelevant. God is not limited to time. Time is irrelevant. And this is what he was saying in 2 Peter 3:8. But do not forget one thing, my dear friends. There is no difference in the Lord's sight between one day and 1,000 years. To him, the two are the same. Time means nothing to God. Time is only important to mortals. That is us. But God lives in eternity. And this is something we have to take into consideration, that God is immortal, he's eternal. Time means nothing to him. And time didn't mean it before the creation or when he was creating the universe. Unfortunately, few people are aware that the Big Bang Theory began as a creationist and theistic concept of a Catholic priest by the name of Georges Lemaitre. It's written like it would be Lemaitre, and a lot of Westerners pronounce it Lemaitre, but it's Lemaitre. And his name was Georges Henri Joseph Edouard Lemaitre. And he was a Belgian Catholic priest. He was a genius, actually. He was a theoretical physicist, a mathematician, astronomer, and a professor of physics at the Catholic University in Louvain. And so he came up with a concept and wrote an academic paper on it in 1927. And he was the first one that came up with the idea. He didn't come up with the term Big Bang. He just called it the expanding universe theory. And it was based on a biblical concept is that the universe had a definite beginning, just as the book of Genesis says. And we have a picture of him, a photograph of him with Robert Mulligan. He was a Nobel Prize winner. And this is after one of his conferences presenting his argument, his thesis. And he's also with Albert Einstein, who was impressed in a number of ways. They had deep conversations, and Einstein was originally of the idea that the universe was a constant state. And Lemaitre, Dr. Lemaitre, the Reverend Dr. Lemaitre, presented to Einstein, that the universe had a definite beginning and it is constantly expanding. There's not a constant state, but it is constantly changing. And he was able to convince Einstein, and they became fast friends. And over a period of time, it was actually not until the 60s, and Dr. Lemaitre, Reverend Dr. Lemaitre, died in the 60s. But it was during this time that the concept of the expanding universe, which was by the 60s known as the Big Bang, began to garner following in the scientific community. Now, we have this photo, and it's after Lemet's lecture and at the California Institute of Technology in January of 1933. Now, one of the first things that Einstein said about the Big Bang Theory, because so many Christians today are terrified of the Big Bang, saying, no, it's against God, it's not of God. But when Einstein read the thesis, he says the entire deal resembles too much the book of Genesis. We easily see that you are a priest. And that was what the scientific community took what we know now as the Big Bang as to be heavily biblically based. So the Reverend Dr. Lemet convinced Einstein, also a theist. Einstein was a Jew, and he firmly believed in God. And so he says, yes, I'll work with you on this. He convinced Einstein of the expanding universe theory, and they collaborated on the corresponding mathematics of the theory. At one point, Einstein, when he first read it, he says, I think the mathematics, your mathematics is abominable. And of course, Reverend Dr. Lemet was a brilliant mathematician, but Einstein worked with him to refine details. We're talking about these huge chalkboards of where they have these huge ladders, and he's talking about this calculation. No, that's laughable. One part of probably maybe 100,000 figures that they had on the board. But brilliant. They had a great and awesome relationship. Now, Pope Pius the 12th tried but couldn't convince Lemet to formulate an apologetical school of thought, a theological a school of thought based on his theory. And Reverend Dr. Lemet felt it was too soon and that much more work needed to be done. He was zealous as to not to bring the church directly into his argument, because he says if people criticize it, if I find myself mistaken about some of my concepts, they're going to blame the church and they're not going to blame me. I'd rather that they blame me and my ideas than to blame the church. So not now, he says. But it is because of that. It is because of my belief in God, and because of my belief in Genesis, and because of my belief in creation that I see things this way. But let it remain with me at this point, and not the church will take it as a doctrine. Not yet. That was his argument at that time. But Pope Pius thought it was such a godly idea that he says, no, we must make it a doctrine, and Lemet did not concede to that. Now, we have in the expanding universe thesis, involved in that is the Hubble, what we call today, since 2011, the Hubble-Lemet law. But from 1933 around 1933, Edwin Hubble wrote a paper, and it was called, from that time up until 2011, the Hubble law. And in many places you'll still find it written as the Hubble law. But Reverend Dr. Lemet wrote his thesis in French. And in 2011, people were going through, cosmologists were going through his papers, and they discovered that many of the things that Edwin Hubble wrote afterwards, after Lemet's paper, and his paper was from 1926 and 1927, were actually almost dangerously close to plagiarizing what Reverend Dr. Lemet had written years before. And so they didn't want to call it that, because it was written in French, and we have no evidence that Hubble actually had the stuff, or that he actually read French well enough to actually extract those ideas. But yes, they were exact duplicates of what Reverend Dr. Lemet had written many years before. So they now formally call it the Hubble-Lemet law, and it's talking about the expanding universe. And the farther things are away from Earth, from our perspective, the faster they're moving. They're increasing in speed. And And so, like, yes, they hold that as an astrophysical truth today. The Hubble-Lamont law was initially called Hubble's law, and as we see, and Nature magazine, the journal, it reports that Lamont wrote his work far before Hubble developed his law and his thesis. So, now where did the Big Bang term come from? It was Sir Frederick Hoyle, and Dr. Hoyle was also a brilliant cosmologist. He was a quasi-atheist. He did not like, he was a constant state cosmologist, and he didn't like the Big Bang at all. He respected both Einstein and Lamont. He respected them, but no, he didn't concede at all. And in one interview, they asked him about the expanding universe, and he says, "Oh, well, that was just like a Big Bang." He said it sarcastically, and it stuck. And so the interesting thing is the Big Bang theory was the expanding universe was given the name the Big Bang theory from one that didn't believe in the Big Bang. Although Hoyle, he claimed to be, in one sense, an atheist, but not a total. He wasn't a sloppy atheist. But there's a quote. He says, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. A superior intellect has a deep involvement with the creation of the universe. And so he was a Cambridge University astrophysicist and a mathematician. My conclusion to this this introduction to Genesis and to understanding Genesis is that the scriptures boldly proclaim no wisdom, no understanding, no counsel can avail against the Lord. Proverbs 21:30. Therefore, nothing is a threat to the claims of the Word of God when all truly and duly examined. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow me on my social media platforms, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Thank you for all of your support. God bless you.